today I'm going to talk about the 5 things that I wish I knew before going to Oxford Medical School. Hi guys, my name is Triya and I am a junior doctor working in London. I graduated from the University of Oxford and I have been working as a junior doctor in central London for nearly 2 years. So the first thing I want to talk about, and it may seem obvious, but it did come as a bit of a surprise to me, was how hard you'll work academically in Oxford. There's a very high workload, coupled with lots of contact hours, meaning time in the labs, tutorials and lectures. But on top of all of this, the exam pass marks are very high. So this is something that I didn't realise till I came to Oxford itself. Whilst in university, 70% is generally regarded to be a first, or the best mark that you can get, whereas in medical school exams, 70% is considered to be a pass. So a lot of medical school exams, especially in clinical school, are pass or fail. However, a pass in normal university exams is around 40%, but in Oxford Medical School, a pass is 70%, which obviously makes it a lot harder. And I remember complaining to my non-medic friends that I was struggling to pass an exam at medical school, and they would think this means, are you struggling to get 40%, which doesn't seem very high, but actually I was struggling to get 70%. Now, when you come from school, this is something that takes a bit of getting used to, because especially for students who get very high grades and are used to getting over 80 and 90% in exams, this can be a little bit difficult to get used to. Although the reason behind this is understandable, because the medical school wants to produce doctors who have a broad knowledge and understanding of most aspects of medicine, and this makes for safer clinical practice. In reality, it is just very hard and it makes exam season very stressful. All of this means that you feel like you're working harder than your non-medic friends, especially because the number of contact hours that medical students have to do is significantly higher than most other subjects. I remember in first year I used to row for my college's rowing team, and we used to have to get up at 5 in the morning in order to go for our practice sessions. We'd finish around 8:30, 8:45, and whilst most people would be going back to their rooms to sleep, I remember having to go to my 9 a.m. lecture, because every morning in medical school you have a lecture at 9 a.m. Whereas for especially humanities subjects, the lectures tend to be more sporadic and later on in the morning. I remember feeling quite jealous that I couldn't spend the time in my bed, but ultimately you do have to remember why you're studying this subject. Another thing that's important to remember is that, unfortunately, you have to get used to exams, because the exams don't stop when you graduate. So postgraduate exams are really important and essential for your training as a doctor in the UK and in other countries as well. And unfortunately, the exams that you have to do as a postgraduate, you don't always get the luxury of having a lot of study leave and a lot of time to revise, because you're most likely working full-time with a very hectic on-call schedule. This is something that I'm having to come to terms with now as an FY2 doctor, and I'm thinking about taking my first postgraduate exam this year, so I will have to become very proficient at balancing my time, more so than I already was in Oxford. So the next thing I want to talk about is how medicine is really a marathon and not a sprint. Now, I know that when you go into medical school, you obviously know that your course is 5 or 6 years long. However, in practice, I found that this was really strange actually, especially around 3rd or 4th year when my non-medic friends were graduating and moving on to finding jobs. Because you are a student for so long, you really have to remember to pace yourself and prioritize your mental well-being in terms of revising for exams. You also have to be aware that you are not going to be earning money for a long time, especially since holding down part-time jobs is not impossible but still quite difficult in medical school. I remember also feeling slightly left behind when my non-medic friends were moving on with their lives and adjusting to working full-time in different cities, and especially the salaries that came with that. However, looking back now, I was really grateful for the 6 years that I was a student, because you do get to reap the benefits of student life. For example, student discounts, longer holidays, and generally avoiding the day-to-day responsibilities of adult working life. Now, having worked full-time for about 13 months, I definitely have a newfound appreciation for all the time I had off as a medical student. I remember asking my friend, who's been working in the corporate world for about 3 years, how long it's taken her to get used to working full-time, and her answer was, you never get used to it. Now, I have asked people who have been consultants for 30 plus years, and they agree that it's not easy to work full-time or even less than full-time. So it is really important to remember that you are in it for the long haul, and that medicine doesn't just finish when you graduate. Oxford. After 5 or 6 years of medical school, you become a foundation year 1 doctor. Once again, you are at the bottom of the hierarchy and you are the most junior person in the team. There is a whole new world of learning that you have to do as a foundation year 1 doctor, all the way up to becoming a consultant. So the learning never stops. This is really good because it's intellectually stimulating. It does mean that you can feel less than adequate quite a lot of the time. And also, you will be known as a junior doctor, even if you have been working as a doctor for 10 plus years. This is something that you definitely have to be aware of. The system may change as we go forwards. However, this is what it is currently, and it is something that you have to accept if you want to be a doctor. I am now an FY2 doctor, which means I am in my second year of postgraduate training, and it is really nice to have junior colleagues and to be able to teach them and mentor them. So it is really rewarding to move up the training pathway. However, it is a very long haul. So another thing that I wish I knew before I came to Oxford Medical School is how independent you have to be in terms of your learning. So although you will have lectures, tutorials and practical classes every day, your tutors and your professors will expect you to have done a lot of reading before you come to the classes. And in order to keep up with the exams and the workload, you have to be very proactive and work quite hard yourself. If you are a good forward planner and you're organised, you can do this work a little bit at a time throughout the whole academic year so that you're not overwhelmed. However, that is easier said than done, especially when it comes to the amount of content you have to get through, as well as balancing your studies with anything else that you want to do. For example, extracurricular activities, sports, friendships, relationships. For example, in preclinical school, so that's years 1 to 3 in Oxford, we had about 2 to 3 tutorials per week. These are 1-hour sessions with a professor, usually in groups of 2 or 3. And for these tutorials, we would have to write essays. The essay could be between anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 words long about a specific topic, and this would require a lot of background research and reading, either from research papers or from textbooks. Now, this whole process would take a long time if you wanted to do it thoroughly and in a way that would help you for your revision at the end of the year. So it does take a lot of self-direction. And this is especially true as well in clinical school, which is 4th, 5th and 6th years for me in Oxford. Now, clinical school is a real balancing act in terms of splitting your time between clinical experience on the wards and in hospitals and studying at home. And this is reflected in the exams because you have written papers, which may be essays or multiple choice questions. And you also have practical clinical exams called OSCEs, where you will be asked to demonstrate your clinical skills in examination and also having to recognize clinical signs and diagnose patients. I personally found that I would benefit from spending more time in the library than in the clinical settings. Something you get really good at, especially as you go through clinical years, is knowing what is useful for you in terms of clinical time, because your time is so precious. It can be useful to sit in on a clinic or go to a ward round, but it's only useful if you are mentally engaging and someone is teaching you the clinical signs or talking to you about what you're seeing. Otherwise, it is fairly pointless to just follow around a clinician and shadow them and not really learn anything. This prioritization is not a skill which you are taught in medical school, rather it is one that you have to develop on your own. But I guarantee you it's something that you'll become quickly good at, as long as you stay motivated. So the final thing I want to talk about, and I think it is really important, it's that you don't have to love your degree all the time to still want to finish it and become a doctor. Everyone I know in medical school, including myself, has, at least at one point in their time, wanted to quit medicine. For me, this became especially clear in my second year of medical school, which is notoriously one of the harder years in Oxford. I remember that year in particular because I was revising very hard and sacrificing on my personal and free time in order to study. However, my grades were still just average. Because of the high level of achievement in Oxford, I remember feeling quite disheartened that no matter what I did, I wouldn't be able to do well. And I just remember feeling very fed up and wanting to give up. And I had lost sight of my motivation, and also the reasons that I had gone into medicine in the first place felt quite redundant at the time because I couldn't make sense of them. I couldn't understand why I wanted to do medicine. Also, because of Oxford in particular, the first couple of years are very science-based. I remember feeling quite detached from the actual reality of being a doctor, and I failed to see how what we were doing then was actually relevant. And now I realise, and I really appreciate, that learning the fundamental physiology and pathophysiology from a science perspective is really useful in order to have a full understanding of medicine. However, I couldn't see that at the time. time. If you're already feeling this way, then one hurdle or setback in your career can make you feel as if you're not really good enough to be a doctor, and it can have you spiraling and worrying about your entire life and whether you've made the right choices. However, I think it's really important to remember that you're not alone in feeling this way, and that almost everybody goes through this at one point, just because of how high stakes and stressful the job can be. It is okay to be demotivated at times, and there have been numerous times where I found myself questioning whether I actually want to be a doctor. I actually think that it is quite healthy to question yourself and make sure that what you're doing is actually what you want, and that you're not just going through the motions and just following a pathway without actually thinking about whether it's suited for you. I think taking the time to mentally reset and allowing yourself to rest, I think it's really important if you're feeling this way to talk about it with someone else, and also to step back if you can, even for just half a day. Once you're feeling rested, it is important then to regain some perspective and think about why you're really doing this, and remember the parts of the course that you find interesting and that you enjoy. So having worked as a doctor now for over a year, there have definitely been times where I have felt stressed out and not wanting to continue. However, I've then realised that there are aspects of the job that I do like. When I felt this way in medical school, I think the best thing to do is to open up about it and then to take a break. I remember it did take me a long time, but one of the things that was useful in Oxford was to try to let go of some of my academic perfectionist tendencies. In school, I would be unhappy if I got a grade less than 90%. However, I had to let this go in Oxford and realize that you don't have to get over 90% in everything in order to be a thoughtful and intelligent and good doctor. I also understand that life is more important than just your career and your academics, so it is important to get a balance and to realize that you don't have to be the best at everything in order to have a fulfilling career and also to be happy. Thank you for watching. I hope this was useful. If you have any more questions, let me know.